Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is so great to have you here today. My name is John Paul Vicari. I use he, him pronouns. I also go by JP. I'm the managing director here at We Create Space, and I will be leading our discussion today, which is all around community building 101 with a focus on inclusion and community. I'm so thrilled to be joined by a wonderful organization in Singapore, Oogachaga, and their recently executive director, who will explain their new role as of today in a few minutes when we introduce him. Um, but Yangfa, so excited to have this conversation with you, and to be able to talk about all of the amazing work that you all are doing, um, and spend the next hour and 10 minutes or so with you and the audience and getting to chat a little bit more. So we've got a great lineup of stuff for you today. We right now are in the middle of the welcome. We're going to do some intros in a second. Yangfa and I are going to have a conversation for about 25 to 30 minutes or so. And then we'll have plenty of time for you to ask questions and engage with each other. We've got some key takeaways prepared, and then we'll talk about how to take what we speak and discuss today forward and send you on your day. Keep your introductions coming in the chat. We love to know who's here. So tell us your name, your pronouns, where you're from. And yeah, let's keep going. So before we dive too far into the conversation, I want to just set some expectations for how we are all going to engage in this space today. So we really want to have an open and respectful conversation. We want you to be really curious about the work that is happening across both of our organizations, but just make sure that you are asking questions that center kindness above all other things. There may be some things that come up today that you may find challenging or triggering. So please just take care of yourself while you are in the space today. We're going to do our best to make sure if there is something where we need to give you a warning, that we give that in advance. I don't think we have too many of those things planned in our talking points, but just in case. And we are recording this, just so you do know. So if you have to pop out at any moment, you can always come back to the recording. And with that, like I said, my name is John Paul. I go by JP. For folks who may need a visual description, I am currently wearing a black shirt that has ghosts on it because I love Halloween. I have dark hair and I'm wearing dark glasses and have headphones in. And Yangfa, I would love for you to come on, do a quick introduction of yourself, and then we'll dive into our conversation.
Thanks so much, JP, and thanks so much, Neil, as well, for just inviting me to be here. Absolutely delighted, nervous, unsure about what to expect. Just looking at faces and names here, this looks like a hopefully kind and respectful audience. So I'll try my best to go with the flow. I'm in your hands, JP and Neil. My name is Yang Fa. My pronouns are he and him. I'm the partnerships manager here at Oogachaga, which is based in Singapore. I have a shaved head. I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing a pink V-neck sweatshirt with a palladium pendant around my neck. My background, the wallpaper, is lots of, I suppose, could describe it as bubbles, full of colorful pride flag designs. The bubbles kind of simulate the double O in Oogachaga. And so that's who I am and what I look like. And yeah. And where do we go from here, JP? Like I said, I'm in your hands.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for agreeing to do this. Part of, our mission in doing these types of events with different organizations around the world is to really be able to platform and spotlight areas and organizations who are doing really great work for the queer community. And so I wonder if maybe you could give a brief introduction to Oogachaga, what the organization is, what you do, a brief history, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So again, as I'm putting my thoughts together on that, I'm actually just been looking at all the self intros. Really, really happy to see quite a few people with connections to Singapore or who happen to be Singaporean. Hi everyone. It's not very clear if people actually are in Singapore or are dialing in, or some people are in the UK and have a connection to Singapore. I think I recognize one or two faces and names. So just to get right into the organization Oogachaga, we are proudly Singapore's most established LGBTQ plus charity. Most established meaning we have been, we're not the oldest, we're most established simply because we've had the opportunity or the good luck, I suppose you could say, to be formally registered. And we've been continuously supporting and affirming the community here in Singapore for the past 25, probably 26 years, since 1999. And that brings me to kind of the story of our name, Oogachaga. Again, without making any assumptions about people's vintage or memories, Oogachaga comes from the chorus of a song. And the song is Hooked on the Feeling by the Swedish band called the Blue Swede. And it was a song that was used as part of the soundtrack in the American TV series that was very popular in the 1990s called Ellie McBeal. Ellie McBeal, the main character, she's actually a lawyer in a law firm. And the actor who plays Ellie is Callista Flockhart, who herself is quite well known, who also happens to have a rather well known husband as well, Harrison Ford. In the TV series, Ellie, who plays the lawyer, often gets, or when she gets stressed out, she actually kind of goes into a bit of a panic attack. And when she has a panic attack, whether she's in the office, conference room, or a gender neutral toilet, or even if she's at home, she'll in the bedroom, she actually hallucinates and a dancing baby appears. A CGI dancing baby appears to the song Hooked on the Feeling. And the opening chorus of the song goes like this: Ooga chaka, ooga chaka, ooga, ooga, ooga chaka. So that's the opening chorus. And the first sung lyric line of the song is, I can't stop this feeling deep inside of me. So the founders of the several co-founders of Oogachaga, they chose the name Oogachaga in connection to or in reference to both the dancing baby as well as the first that line from the song, I can't stop this feeling deep inside of me, because they felt, as gay and bisexual men themselves, they felt that it was something that many of us in the LGBTQ plus community could connect with, the idea of I can stop this feeling deep inside of me. And the significance, I suppose, the symbolism of that dancing baby is also about how, and quite significantly, the actual gender of the dancing baby is never revealed. So I'll use the gender neutral pronoun. They are kind of like they represent, or they could represent anything basically. They appear when Ellie least expects it, whether she's having a panic attack or whether she's having a nightmare or a dream. And when you think about it, maybe the dancing baby, it's about our deepest fears and shame, or things that we want to cover and hide, secrets. And at the same time, maybe the dancing baby is also about the hopes and dreams that we have about ourselves in the future as well. So that kind of multiple layers of meaning infused into the dancing baby, as well as a reference to that song, I Can't Stop This Feeling Deep Inside of Me. So that's kind of like the slightly long-winded explanation to our the name, the so-called origin story, right? I suppose a more recent reference or more recent use of the song in popular media would be probably the Guardians of the Galaxy, the second one, when is it the Star-Lord, he gets, I don't know, caught, and then the scene where he puts his Walkman on the table and it's playing that song. So again, that's how and what we got our name as an organization. We are, well, since day one actually, since it was founded by a group of gay and bisexual men. It's about supporting each other and also supporting the community. So even though it was founded by a group of gay and bisexual men, over time we've evolved and grown to include women, trans people, non-binary folks as well, whether it's volunteers, clients, staff as well. Just kind of go back a little bit to our origin story, the group of gay and bisexual men who came together and co-founder Oogachaga were all, well, unfortunately, survivors of conversion practices. Maybe a slight important content warning here. Are we going to describe a bit about experiences of LGBTQ conversion practices? Um, the experience of in Singapore, at least in the local context, very much led by religious organizations, churches, in this instance, who bring together, in this case, gay and bisexual men in kind of a support group format to talk about, well, how not to be gay, how not to be queer, how not to be bisexual. um, the co-founders of Oogachaga met each other through one of these support groups. And what the long and short of it is, well, first of all, the conversion, the attempts to turn them straight did not work clearly. But the more positive part of it is they learned that the support group format was a positive experience for them, being in a room and sitting with like-minded people. And the idea of, well, we're there for each other was helpful for them. So after they left uh, that particular conversion support group, they decided to replicate it in the non-religious setting and, more importantly, in the queer affirming setting as well. And that's how Oogachaga started. They met together, I think, in somebody's living room, and then realized that that was something that was important. And then from the support group format, they expanded it into recruiting volunteers who are trained in counseling or psychology and social work to provide that support to other LGBTQ plus people as well. So the urban myth goes there'll be a support group running in somebody's living room, and then in the bedroom there'll be a counseling session, and that was all very kind of grassroots community kind of base. And then over time, like I mentioned a bit earlier, they were able to formally register as an organization here, as a non-profit organization here in Singapore. And that was actually very helpful because it meant that they could have access to a bank account and donations and funds. And then from there, it just kind of took a while to grow. After some time, they were able to raise enough funds to hire full-time staff, to have an office. And I mean, all that is, I wish we had proper documentation of it, but a lot of it is kind of through a recent memory, but really, I wasn't personally involved in the founder of Oogachaga, but I do know some of the founders who are still around, and just hearing some of those stories actually is really inspiring because Singapore was a very different time. 25 years ago, it was still criminal for gay men to be sexually active, for example, and there was still threats of police allegations of police intimidation, harassment. There was a lot of fear of police raids, for example. So I remember what some of the early founders and even the early staff or volunteers were really worried about was to keep documents or a list of names of volunteers and clients because they were worried that if there was a police raid, that people would be outed and be in danger. So for that reason, we don't have a lot of documentation of what the early years were like. A lot of it is through maybe just online footprint or the occasional, interviews that we have or people who are still around who hopefully have still good memories of what it was like 25 years ago. So yeah.
I I love so much of what you've just unpacked for everyone, even though we had a discussion and I got to hear a lot of this ahead of time. Hearing it again, like it makes me even more excited to like really dig in with you. There's so many wonderful comments in the chat already as well. About hearing the origin story. Like I think it's really important. We're obviously recording this, but very often our history isn't documented and it gets lost. And so it's kind of really cool that like now you're contributing to that archive for Oogachaga and like you'll have this to come back to. And so, in another 25 years, if you're not a part of the organization, then, other people can come back and listen to something like this and really hear your firsthand account. And I'm really curious to find out just more about you and your background and what led you to come to Oogachaga and spend. I mean, you've been there for over a decade. What led you to come to work there?
Oh, because yeah, I've been thinking about that quite a bit. I mean, where I am right now in 2025, I spoke about how Oogachaga was founded in 1999. That also happened to be the year I graduated from university. So I started my first job not at Oogachaga, but in the public sector actually. So for the first few years of my professional life, I was in public service. I was working for a government agency in a non-profit sector. I was a government agency overseeing the coordination of social services planning and funding. And so that was back then with my initial background in social policy, it felt like almost the perfect place to work in government, with lots of overview of how public social services were run by nonprofit organizations, and again direct connections with government departments and all that. So that for me was incredible. And of course, working in that job gave me lots of exposure to very passionate social workers, social service professionals, counselors, psychologists, and all that, people who were running organizations and providing social services. So it was no big surprise that from there I decided to do two things: to leave that job to work in a direct social service. A social service organization that provided direct services in that case. And back then it was Samaritans. In the UK, it's the Samaritans. In Singapore, it's Samaritans of Singapore, SOS. So took on a full-time job with them. And at the same time, I decided to take on graduate studies in social work. So when I kind of made two, on hindsight, pretty important decisions to change jobs, to go from planning kind of a government level work to what we call on the ground direct service provision. I suppose some people call that frontline work as well, working in Singapore's National Suicide Prevention Agency, Samaritans of Singapore, at the same time taking evening classes in social work. One of the, I suppose, most stressful times of my life, to have a day job and to do part-time graduate studies. I did that. Again, I don't regret it for a minute. But that for me, so I was 4.5 years in public service, and then another 7.5 years working in Samaritans of Singapore. And of course, I qualified as a social worker at one point, and then the opportunity came up back in 2013 to work in Oogachaga. The former executive director approached me and kind of the vacancy was available to be his deputy. And I suppose I can tell you now that the first time he asked me, I kind of said, no, I'm not interested. Quite happy working in the Samaritans. And I added this comment and said, well, if after a few tries, if you can't find anyone else, come back to me. So he went off. Clearly, they didn't find the right candidate, and then he came back to me, by which time I couldn't say no. So I applied for the job, got the job, and so worked as his deputy, and then the deputy executive director for 2 years, from 2013 to 2015. And then when it was time for him to step away and continue serving as chair of the board, he was appointed the executive director in 2015, and that was 10 years ago. And earlier this year, I made the decision, and again, having that conversation with the board about how it felt like it was time for me and for the organization, time for me to step aside as the executive director, and time for the organization to have someone else lead it, to have a different executive director. Because 10 years on the job, I've done what I can, what I want to. I don't regret a minute of it. And yet I don't see myself, and I don't want to, and I don't think I should do another 10 years of this. So earlier this year, I had a conversation with the board, and we put in place I suppose you could call it a leadership renewal plan. And I am very proud to say today, the 21st of October, 2025, is the first day of the new executive director. Her name is Yin Yi. She's just started with us today. This was her first full day on the job, so which also means this is my first full day on the job as partnerships manager and no longer executive director. Now, encourage everyone to maybe after this session, go look us up on social media, in particular Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, where we have posted a short bio on Yin Yi's professional background and also her relationship with Oogachaga as well. Some of you might be surprised. I mean, just talk a bit about history as well. Just give a little bit away. Yin Yi, back in 2008, she was the first full-time social worker hired by Oogachaga back then. And again, as a person, as a professional, as a social worker, she has maintained a relationship with us. So now it feels like, yeah, she's personally, I do think she's the perfect person for the role, and I'm so glad. Uh, we now have a new executive director who is familiar to us and who is familiar with us. Yeah, as well.
I saw the announcement this morning and I couldn't wait to jump on to sort of talk through this with you because obviously you told us when we originally met and were discussing, what we could talk about, that, this was coming, but you weren't super sure of the timeline just yet. So it was really exciting to wake up and see that this morning. And we'll come to that in a second, but I want to, somebody put a comment in, and I kind of want to explore this with you that all of your work as a social worker and your previous jobs gave you a ton of really wonderful insight and value to bring into Oogachaga. And I'm curious, with that in mind, how did you identify different ways for the organization to be more inclusive, knowing that you had all of this, professional and lived experience to draw upon? Like, were there specific things that when you stepped in, you said, you know what, this community needs us maybe more right now, or there are areas of Singapore where maybe there are people that
Mhm.
we're not in touch with? Like, how did you approach inclusion stepping into that role with all of your experience?
I mean, totally, because I suppose let me bear with me for a bit because where I'm gonna start in responding to the question, I suppose I come from a place of, at least in my mind, 10, 12 years ago, 12 years ago when I started Oogachaga, was really coming from a place of limitations because, I mean, lots of small non-profit community organizations in Singapore, we are riddled with limitations, whether it's limitations in human resources, financial resources, capacities, abilities, skills, and all that. And yet, we are never short of dreams and aspirations. So, with that in mind, again, sometimes limitations, the word sounds like a dirty word, right? Because I mean, we all want to be proud of what we do. We are sometimes maybe quite maybe afraid or wary of acknowledging limitations. But again, I mean, why not? Why not kind of just be aware of what we have and also what we don't have? So with kind of that in mind, I just can think of how, 12 years ago, again, Singapore was a different time. Oogachaga was slightly smaller and different from where we are now, 12 years on. I kind of made a very, I suppose, conscious or maybe subconscious decision to kind of go, well, this is where we are right now. We do need to reach out a bit more to different communities, different partner organizations out in the community, and do a lot more in terms of collaboration. But this was actually I was reminded of this by another community leader recently. They reminded me of how in the early years, um, Oogachaga was seen very much as a gay men's organization. It had partly to do with how we were doing a lot of HIV prevention work. And so at that time, in terms of the volunteers who were involved with us were mainly uh, cis gay men, and also the funding we're attracting was very much, geared towards HIV prevention. And again, whether it's because of a perception or just the way we work, it was just how it was. Again, clearly not an excuse, or just it kind of gave gave the community a certain perception of what Oogachaga is. I mean, I remember back then, 10, 12 years ago, there were people who didn't want to volunteer with or use our services because of that perception. Oh, Oogachaga is a gay men's organization. I didn't like that because even as a gay man, I didn't want people to feel like they couldn't or didn't want to approach an organization for a service because as a member of staff at that time, I knew that about the quality of the services we're delivering. To hear people feel like they didn't want to or couldn't use our service, that was actually quite sad for me. So you could say gradually over time, we kind of tweak little things here and there in terms of collaborating with different organizations to do more programs or services that were less overtly gay men focused, that were less overtly HIV prevention focused. And at the same time, well, in terms of staff strength, we're quite small, so we're limited on that. But we had this wonderful opportunity to really diversify our volunteers in terms of recruitment, so the selection process. Again, not that we were discriminating against cis gay men, but we were looking for more diverse volunteers to come join us. And then at the same time, one of our core services is professional counseling. And that's where people come in for face-to-face sessions with our professional counselors, staff, as well as trained volunteers, qualified volunteers as well. So that was very important for people to see that the staff and volunteers who were providing the services were reflective of the community itself. And one of the things that we did, excuse me, was that we will ask people, how when they sign up for the professional counseling service, we'll ask, how did you hear about Oogachaga? And over time, I picked up a back then I thought it was a really important statistic. A lot of the cis gay men were finding Oogachaga counseling services through good old-fashioned internet search Google. A lot of the women, the queer women and trans clients were hearing about us through word of mouth. When you think about it, that makes complete sense. Women and trans and non-binary and gender diverse folks want to have a slightly more, I suppose, personal or trusted connection to somebody they know who has used a service, and a service like professional counseling is something that's so crucial, right? So essential. So they want to know somebody who has had a positive experience. So over time, when we had diversified our professional staff team, volunteers, and counselors. And over time, our volume of clients increased, and the proportion, the gender distribution and SOGI kind of a distribution as well, kind of became a bit more diverse. And that was, and I can tell you that did not happen overnight. Um, I do play with Excel and numbers a lot, even though I don't enjoy it, but it's one of those necessary things, right? We have to look at numbers and look at trends over years or whatever. And over time, that that actually showed that, more people were coming and using our services overall, which was great. And more women and trans folks, clients were using our services as well compared to cis gay men. So that's something yeah, that we learned over time to kind of like tweak things. And again, everything, I believe in doing little things gradually rather than doing big things because change takes time. And maybe I'm in this really fortunate position to have hung around long enough to see those changes take place. So yeah, I'm just kind of just glancing through some of the comments that are coming in as
Yeah.
well. And yes, everything that everyone's saying is uh, um, yeah, about queer women and experiences with gay men and service delivery as well. And I say this as a former executive director of a charity as well, I would challenge the charity bosses out there, especially LGBTQ plus charity bosses out there, to really think about how inclusive are we really? Um, I don't want to say we are totally inclusive, but that has been our journey in the past 10, 15 years or so. There's probably a lot more we could be doing. And of course, with the journey towards inclusion and diversity and accessibility, that doesn't and shouldn't stop as well. I mean, just on a quick note on accessibility, to be painfully honest, our office is on the third floor of a 100-year-old shop house. And if anybody knows anything about shop houses in Singapore, is they do not have lifts or escalators. So it's up 3 flights of stairs. So that's my slightly long-winded way of saying our office is not physically accessible to people who have mobility needs. But in other ways, we try. Again, there are limitations to what we can or can't do. Resources are limiting, and yet in other ways we try. So again, it's back to knowing where we are, where our limitations are, as well as where our strengths are as well.
Yeah, thank you again for sharing so much wealth in everything that you just mentioned. And I do think, especially as cis queer men, like so much of our power and privilege has been gi- given to us off the backs of like what other queer women and trans and non-binary people have done on the front lines. And I do think we're sort of at that well past sort of the tipping point of like what cis queer men owe back to the community. And so I love everything that you were just talking about within that. And somebody put a question in the chat, and I think this is a good time for maybe us to talk about this. But how do you or how have you used language, or what techniques in like your comm structure and marketing and social media posts have you used to draw more people in without necessarily alienating or making others feel excluded? I know, again, sort of in my role at We Create Space, like it's really tough sometimes to navigate that. So, what have you done that you've seen has been successful in drawing more people in?
Um, Again, full disclosure, I do not have professional training in comms or marketing or journalism or anything like that. If anything, whenever we write anything, or when I write anything, or when I edit anything, I imagine I'm the reader. If I want to read that, that makes sense. So I like to kiss. Keep it simple, sweetie. So why write 25 words when 10 would do? Why use a four-syllable word when a two-syllable word would do, right? Because again, by no means I'm not trying to be patronizing or condescending. It's really about, I suppose, what's the term people use? It's about using plain language, plain, right? Using plain language. This, I mean, I don't know if we've got any MPs in the room, but we don't need to overtalk or make long speeches when a short paragraph would do, right? But it's about getting to the point, communicating a message or a point clearly. I'm fortunate enough to have a role in keeping our website up to date, or even supporting colleagues in putting out content for social media as well. And again, colleagues past and present may know me as the guy with the red pen, slicing through, cutting out words that don't need to be there. It's, to be honest, it is a bit of a double-edged sword as well. Editing matters. Just getting it right. We Let's put out what we ourselves want to read. I don't know. There might be some people here who would like to, but I don't like reading a long social media post that's not saying much. If we're putting out something, it should be saying something that's important, to the point. We're not talking about bullet points. We're talking about maybe plain language, short sentences, words that are unambiguous. Um, yeah, again, I suppose that applies to, say, giving media interviews as well. For example, I'm a big fan of offering media interviews. In particular, I prefer a written interview because I know I can be in control of the kind of phrases and quotes that I can give. Um, and some people call it sound bites, but it's really about getting a message across in a way that I suppose makes sense. So, and then from there, I mean, if that's the basis of how we want to communicate, I don't think we can go very wrong from there. I know of some other people or organizations who want to try to impress with either length or size of the message. But then in this day and age, I think many of us can sense it, can smell it, can sniff it. People, discerning audiences kind of go, yeah, I can see that, but what's underneath? What are you trying to say? Why are you using such big words, when simpler, plain words would do. So that, I suppose, that's where I'm coming from. I don't know if I'm being a bit vague, but yeah.
No, no, I don't think you're being vague at all. I think what I'm hearing from you, right, it's about being approachable. It's about being authentic. And I think when if you're struggling as an individual or as another community organizer to navigate how to put out messaging, my go-to is always how does this actually relate back to our values and our mission?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a clear sense of what that is, none of your communication is going to be clear. But if you have a really strong mission and value set, it's really easy to anchor everything else sort of around that. Um, and I guess I'm also slightly curious. Like, do you find, and forgive me for not knowing this off the top of my head, but are there different maybe words or terms or phrases that you find in Singapore when it comes to the queer community that exist maybe specifically in Singapore that maybe don't translate out, or vice versa? Like, are there other phrases that you feel like are really common in queer culture that maybe don't translate into Singaporean culture? And like, how do you navigate that when it comes to inclusion?
Sure. I suppose I could start by explaining that in Singapore, we are one of the few countries in the world where we have actually not one, not two, not three, but four official languages. So we've got English, Chinese, Malay, and Tamil as official languages. Probably the only other country I can think of would be Switzerland. They also have four official languages, different official languages, right? But again, that's kind of the context we work in. Of course, English is the primary language that many people use, but it also means that we also need to be considerate towards other communities who might have Chinese or Malay or Tamil as their first language, their mother tongue, so to speak, right? So sensitivities towards that. So even within our four different official languages, we have to be mindful of use of the word gay, for example. Again, different languages might have different connotations about certain words, or maybe okay in one language or the other. So sensitivities, but most times, and I say this in a slightly sheepish way as well, we kind of get away with it by just using kind of the good old-fashioned English words. And again, when it comes to, well, in recent years, it's been drawn to our attention that the word queer could be a bit tricky, not just in the Singapore English context, but say amongst the Mandarin, Chinese speaking, Malay speaking, Tamil speaking communities as well. But again, much as I have an ambivalent relationship with language and our use of it, at the same time, I'm also kind of somebody who acknowledges that language and how we use it is constantly evolving. So, and everyone will use it in different ways. So again, back to your question about any specific words, it would be the word queer. And of course, there's all those other slur words that we use in Chinese and Malay and Tamil as well, which we have a clear red line about. We just do not and should not use them anymore. And talking about language and terminologies as well, it's one of the topics we touch on when we do engagement talks, whether it's with our corporate partners or with our professional counterparts as well, my fellow social workers and counselors out there, because so much of the work that we do, whether in corporate businesses or even as professionals in social work, counseling, healthcare, education, so much is based on how we use language and words as well. Um, it's never and it shouldn't be about political correctness. Earlier, you spoke about kindness and respect. That's what language is about, even in media, actually, using the right terms, because as we all know, words and language have power. How we use it is not just about communicating to you facts and information, it's also about communicating to you my attitudes and beliefs and values and assumptions and biases as well. So all that comes with it. Well, power and responsibility. So again, it's an ongoing work in progress. And again, it is not just the role of teachers or journalists or even language professors. It's day to day. I do consider language as a tool of activism as well, to use appropriate words and terminologies and phrases, and then inviting people to think, should we be using that or should we not? Just to kind of sidetrack a little bit, there is some relevance to this. Here in Singapore, the largest local national newspaper. Again, I don't know if people remember what newspapers are, but I know those printed bits where people read from, newspapers. The Straits Times, they recently announced that they've got a in-house journalist style guide on reporting on people with disabilities. Now, this is 2025. This is a newspaper that's been in business since 1845. It took them 180 years to decide or to formalize a style guide for writing about people with disabilities. But to their credit, they finally done it. So after consultation with the disability community, they landed on a person-focused language rather than a disability-focused language, which makes sense. So, for example, in their style guide, they would describe a person as a wheelchair user or a person with a disability rather than all those other inappropriate terms that other people use, which I thought was great. But that, of course, also begs the question, do they have a style guide for writing about the LGBTQ plus community? The short answer is no. So, but again, that's an opportunity for engagement with the local professional media as well. So we've got a meeting lined up with the editor. But again, it's things like that. These things take ages. It is, I suppose, advocacy with a small a. It's about language. It's about respect. It's about kindness. It's about professionalism. Yeah, I mean, maybe that might make sense to some people in the audience here.
Yeah, I definitely think it does. Um, so thank you for that. We have a question in the chat, and I'm gonna throw this over to you, but also to everybody else listening in. Please feel free to contribute answers. But someone just asked, specifically more within like corporate communities, so like pride networks, employee resource groups. There's a strong variation of the desire to do advocacy work versus social activities. So I think that's true sort of any organization regardless, right? But how do you or how have you navigated balancing both of those things to drive continuous engagement? Um, have, maybe how have you not been successful in that?
Yeah,
Could be a good example if you have one to think of.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
curious your
Uh,
thoughts.
Totally. I have a few thoughts about that. Again, again, I'm very careful not to give too many specific details. But again, my response to that will be: does it have to be a good old binary? Does it have to be about advocacy versus activities? As we all know, binaries need to be smashed. Why not? Again, when I see the word balance, I'm thinking of, does it have to be a either or? Why not think of it as a mix? Sometimes you can mix in maybe elements of advocacy as we are doing fun social activities. So mixing, kind of a pick and mix kind of a way of doing things. I'll give an example. We have in the past, and we still are working with them, some big tech brands who operate in Singapore and very supportive of the work we do. And they want to think of ways of contributing their volunteer hours and corresponding funds to support the work that we do in Oogachaga. But for some reason, perhaps because of a company bureaucracy, it was not possible for them to be open about this engagement between their employees at Oogachaga. So we landed on this idea of, well, the employees can volunteer their time and support the work we do with Oogachaga, and we don't have to acknowledge them publicly, but we still benefit. So one example was the employees kind of donated their volunteer time to weave rainbow bracelets for us. So they were donating time and actual tangible things, rainbow bracelets, donated a whole bunch. They've been donating a whole bunch of handmade rainbow bracelets to us, and it feeds into our, I suppose you could say, community activism. We give them out for free, show of support, allyship, have conversations with your peers about know what the symbolism of the rainbows, and then at no point are we allowed to tell people who made them. We just say it's corporate volunteers without naming the company. But that's a kind of a weird but fun and I suppose you could say win-win kind of a combination of yes, it's fun, it's social for them, and for us, it's an opportunity to engage with the community as well. Rainbow bracelets, and then we've since had different variations of this as well. Again, some companies are comfortable being named. So, for example, we partnered Bloomberg to so their employees decided that well, somebody else has done the rainbow bracelets, we'll do something else. So they've been helping us do the Pride ribbon awareness ribbons. So I wish I had a sample here, but just cutting the rainbow ribbons and then folding them into the letter A for awareness, and then we give those out as well as a symbol of allyship, I suppose advocacy as well. And again, I suppose when we think about how we do activism and advocacy, it's not always about the big letter A activism. In Singapore, at least, it's actually illegal to march down the street in protest. You get arrested for that. But again, activism and advocacy can be done in other ways, whether it's about writing letters to the newspaper, or whether it's about having closed door meetings with political office holders. Because there are different ways, different ways of engaging and showing up and doing. I suppose that the disclaimer to that would be as many in the room will probably know, activism is often a long game. Well, sometimes it can change, can happen overnight. More often than not, it does require a sustained action and sustained action with a team or with a group or entire community of like-minded people as well. Again, like I said, I'm fortunate and privileged enough to have seen this in Oogachaga over a span of 12 years. Um, yeah, and it can happen, and it will with enough, I suppose, tenacity and persistence and creativity. Because somebody said that, no, creativity as well.
Yeah, and I guess I maybe just want to reflect back what I'm hearing from you is it's about creating pathways. And the pathways for individuals can look very different, but I think it's important for us if we are going to be inclusive and in building these, right? It's really finding out what can work for different audiences within, your employee resource group or within your local community, and offering almost more modular type activations, right? Because it could be, advocacy for some folks could be making an introduction to someone else for someone, right? It could be making rainbow bracelets, like it could be marching in a protest, right? There's just all these different pathways that we can help create with each other. So I want to encourage folks, if you have other questions, please pop them in the chat. You're welcome to raise your hand and come off mute if you would like. But there is one other thing we haven't talked about yet that I want to make sure we can discuss, which is your leadership transition, because I think this is actually a really important part about community building and being inclusive. And I love the term that you're using for this, your leadership renewal. And you've got somebody coming in now, whose first day is today. You're moving into a different role. And I guess I'm just sort of curious, like when you think of renewal and inclusion, especially at the leadership level, like why was this important to you? And what do you think that means for the future of what leadership at Oogachaga looks like?
Again, a few thoughts came to mind as we were chatting earlier, and um, of course, when the when the vacancy came up in July, again, lots of friends and contacts got in touch and expressed concern. They were asking like, "Oh, Yang Fa, are you resigning or are you retiring?" Because obviously, when they see your position being advertised, it's one or the other, right? And of course, I had to reassure people that it's neither. It is renewal, as you said. And I suppose it's a very I suppose unconventional way of doing things because when you think about it, when the top person in the company leaves, it's either because, and again, excuse my language, it's either because or they die, or they've been ousted, or they're resigning, or they've been sacked, right? So, and I didn't want any of that. Certainly don't want to die in office. So I decided, well, again, back to another R as well. As the leader of the organization, clearly I and the board have a responsibility as well to ensure the continued sustainability of the organization. So I decided in consultation with the board that that was probably the best way to do this, a smooth transition, renewal, in terms that we could figure out. So again, and I can now share this, we've been having this conversation since earlier this year. It was not meant to be, and I didn't want it to be an overnight decision. And we wanted to be planned, and we say plan, that's how far back we had been planning. We wanted to see this year out and then start thinking of, hiring that new person to join us and so on and so forth. And of course, we wanted to tie neatly with Pride Month, somewhere in the middle. Our financial year is January to December. So there are lots of different considerations. We wanted to do this properly, if you will. And of course, at the same time, there was no playbook. The playbooks that are out there are the either you die or retire or resign or you get sacked. We didn't want any of that. So, and this is where we are. So back to the idea of it is a responsible thing for a board, leadership, and management to do the right thing for the organization. I did not feel it was the right thing for me to continue doing this for another 10 years. Neither did I feel it was the right thing for me to retire or resign. So, so we landed on renewal and a smooth transition of leadership.
I love it. I Yeah, I think it's really wonderful that you were very open to the idea of what something new in the future could look like, that the organization supported you. I think it really speaks to all aspects of community building and like listening to not only just the community you're serving, but the community of the people who work there, and really what's best, for that. And yeah, I think it's really wonderful to hear it. I said this earlier when we were chatting that, as queer people, we've sort of been able to imagine our lives differently because we haven't had any other choice to. And I think that can be applicable in so many ways, including situations like this, where, we don't have to do what's sort of the normal pathway of like waiting for someone to retire or resign, or get fired to bring in new voices and new leadership. Like we can be really intentional about it. And I think that's exciting. We've had a couple questions that came in, so I want to make sure that we get to them because we're coming towards the end of our time together. We've got about 20 minutes to go. Um, but this first question says, now that Singapore's legal landscape has shifted a little, how do you see community visibility changing, especially around events like Pride or Pink Dot? Are there particular community priorities or messages you'd like allies abroad to amplify?
Again, I mean, I alluded to that earlier with a whole bunch of laws that would seem very weird and old-fashioned to, well, non-Singaporean audiences or the Singaporeans in the room will kind of be familiar with what I'm talking about. But the idea that we have only recently decriminalized consensual same-sex intimacy between adult men in private 3 years ago, that's mind-blowing. So it's only been 3 years since it's been perfectly legal for me to be a sexually active gay man. Of course, in terms of other legislation and changes as well, I think it is often frustrating for a lot of people in Singapore, the LGBTQ plus community in particular, to be aware of the legal context here in Singapore, while at the same time be so aware and open to the, well, changes around the world, not just in our region, but around the world as well. Earlier this year, we saw Thailand have same-sex marriage equality. And then, of course, further north in Taiwan as well, right? And then, of course, we are further south of Australia and New Zealand, very progressive legislation and social context for the LGBTQ plus community. So while there's probably a lot that we here in Singapore want to see happen, we are actually sometimes bound by legislation. But then to the point, to your question about now what do we wish allies or non-queer people should know or should want to see with the landscape here in Singapore. I think it's really about acknowledging that visibility, representation really, really matter. I think that can never be overstated enough. I often get jokes or jibes or comments from my friends. I think just the other day I was at an event, it was a queer event, and the queer person sat next to me and just turned and kind of looked at me and said, Young Fa, why are you still dressed as if it was Pride Month? This was October. And I think it was a passing comment, but that made me realize how many of us, and for one of a better phrase, we kind of dress down outside of Pride Month. It's most like we don't want to be too queer. But then for me at least, I don't speak for anyone else on this, on anyone. I do want to visibly dress queer, partly because of my professional role, and partly because when I'm on public transport or out on the street, hopefully, if that 13-year-old person or that parent of a trans child or the colleague of um, non-binary person in the office sees me, they kind of realize, oh, hang on, yeah, I'm not the only person on this street, on this train in the world to be queer or queer friendly or queer affirming. There are other people like that. So the idea of visibility, representation, and we're not even talking about being on a stage or panel or pedestal, just being who and where we are in the workplace, on public transport, on the street. Of course, for many of us, there are safety concerns as well. It's a matter of being visible and where we can in ways that we think would matter. Um, I'm also reminded that I have all my privileges, right? I am a majority race, professionally educated, cis gay man. I walk into a room, people will listen to me. Um, put me in front of a camera, I can talk when the cows come home, people will still listen to me, right? And of course, I also want to use those privileges to my advantage as well. As a cis gay man, majority race, and all that, I also want to be an ally to other communities as well, to women in my professional role, my day-to-day life, to trans people, to people with disabilities. And I also urge everyone on this call to think about how else we can be allies. It's not just about queer people and allies who are not queer. Even within our own communities as well, we can and should be allies to each other too. And then when our non-queer allies or friends or family members look at us, they kind of go, right, that's how you do it. And then we kind of expand that possibility of allyship. I just want to kind of draw a slightly tenuous link to, I think it was a comment or question somebody had about the ERGs in corporate settings as well. Um, Yes, there are many wonderful brands and companies and businesses out there who probably have very separate employee resource groups, like could be Pride and Women and Family and Disabilities. One of my top tips would be for the Pride networks to ride on existing established ones. So have a collab, have a family and Pride event. So talk about families with a bit of a queer element to it, because all queer people have families. And some families might want to talk about queer issues. So again, rather have a standalone Pride event right on an existing established network, whether it's a women's network or a generations network. So that collab and then riding on the more established network's audience as well. So that's actually one of the top tips I kind of share with a lot of our corporate partners.
Yeah, thank you. I actually think you've answered another question that came in, which is around engaging with younger or newer members in communities. But I think it really comes back to some of the core principles you just discussed, which is around visibility, authenticity, sort of reserving judgment and not putting your own bias out there, but inviting people in and having discussions. I think for We Create Space in particular, like we try to facilitate a lot of multi-generational discussions across sort of any identity, because there's so much to learn from our shared knowledge and history, to help people sort of navigate, their own identity. So thank you. There's another question that I want to get to. So bear with me, because this one, I think there's a lot to unpack, and I'm going to give you, we've got maybe 3 minutes to answer this question. So it says conversion therapy manifests itself in many forms. It does not have to be overtly like how the former Exodus International and its affiliates presented itself. It can often be disguised as LGBTQ plus affirming safe spaces. Should LGBTQ plus institutions come out with counter conversion therapy strategies, like how to spot conversion therapy groups veiled as LGBTQ plus affirming spaces? I don't have an answer for
Wow.
this one, so if you do, please take the time to answer it.
I would definitely welcome other responses, even as I ramble on as well. I guess always what comes to mind immediately is you're absolutely right. It happens right here in Singapore as well. And I say this as a social worker. Lots of my fellow healthcare and social service professionals use the term LGBTQ affirming very liberally, and liberally in the very vague, open sense. Everybody and anybody who works with LGBTQ clients and patients might decide to slap that term on their website or social media profile. I suppose I don't know if we want to do the counter conversion practice, because that sounds a bit like an eye for an eye, right? I'm more inclined to think about how we, as communities, as professionals, as service providers, and service users, how we should maybe just sit down and define for ourselves what being LGBTQ affirming means. Let's not allow other people to define it for us. We should define what it feels like to be a user of LGBTQ affirming services, what we want: LGBTQ affirming healthcare, counseling, housing, services, legal services, employment, what that should look like. So we as a community, whether it's professionals or service users as well as service providers, we claim back that term and we define what LGBTQ affirming is. There already is lots of evidence and data to show that conversion practices are harmful, or that's important. At the same time, let's also claim back what being LGBTQ affirming is. Don't let other people do it, because if we do, they'll do it, they'll take it, and they will define it for themselves to our detriment. Hope that makes sense. Yeah. Maybe that was
It-
rambling. No, maybe that
no,
was
no, no,
counter rambling.
no. I think that was amazing. That was so insightful and such a beautiful response. So thank you for that. Um, Thank you, everyone who put questions in. We're going to move on to our key takeaways. Again, the both of us prepared a few high-level things that we wanted to give to everyone to take forward. So we're going to get those pulled up in just 1 second.
Can you see them?
No, Neil, the slide we see is the reflection slide. There we go. Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'm first. It's always a surprise. I always forget the running order because I don't have the slides pulled up. So my key takeaways, and I've said some of these in previous meetings like this, but I do think that they bear repeating. We have to be adaptable as community groups. So each person in community is going to have different needs, and a one-size-fit-all approach can actually do more harm than good. And how we can combat that and how we drive inclusion is with feedback. Creating systems to collect and action feedback is how community groups evolve and thrive. We do so much evaluation and survey of our community at We Create Space because we want to make sure what we're doing is actually serving the community we're trying to put, resourcing towards. And so asking for feedback is actually a really critical part of making sure that we're able to drive forward some of these things like inclusion, like well-being, like leadership. And then the last thing I put in here, and we've touched on this sort of in the language conversation, and again, sort of part of why we as an organization have tried to branch out and reach out to organizations around the globe to have these discussions with, because we have an obligation to be culturally competent. And there's so much richness that exists within the queer community. And so any opportunity we have to expand our own personal knowledge, our collective knowledge, and learn from each other, I think only drives, again, sort of the point of why we do this work, and in being inclusive, and hearing about different stories in history, to bring us all together as queer people. So Yangfa, I'm going to come over to you for your key takeaways and what you want
That's
to share with the
mine.
group.
Thank you. Thanks, JP. I mean, thinking about the takeaways, right? It's really about communities that we matter because we form communities, we are part of communities. So communities matter because we matter. And of course, communities don't appear overnight. We need to build them. So the process of building community, of community building matters too. So that's takeaway number one. Takeaway number two, and this is a very personal reflection as well. Well, oh, hang on. There's a missing word there. The second takeaway should say leaders are not all born. And for some of us, leadership doesn't always come naturally because I know some people may believe that leaders are either born or made. Well, I do believe that not all leaders are born. Some leaders are made. And for some of us who end up in leadership roles, it may not have come naturally to us. So that's been my experience. Please feel free to disagree. So leaders are not all born, or not all leaders are born this way. The third takeaway for me, the takeaway I hope you can take from this is that when we talk about communities and community building, in addition to talk about language and cultural competency, I think we also need to acknowledge the importance of history. I mean, personally, I've just reached a couple of milestones in my personal life, and of course, 10 years like executive director, I consider that as a major milestone as well. I'm invited to think about history of our community here in Singapore. So history of the organization I work for, Oogachaga, where I am and where we are now. And of course, it's also about, well, past, present, and future as well. As we look forward, we also want to acknowledge where we are and where we've come from. I mean, some people see it as linear, some people see it as circular, and why not? It is an ongoing process. Yeah, and communities, all communities have history. The trick is to acknowledge it and recognize it. So, my three takeaways. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you. Honestly, this has been so much fun and has brought me so much joy to get to, be in conversation with you. And as, somebody doing a leadership job in a community-based organization, like you bring me so much hope of like what my future can look like and the things that I still have to learn and can bring. So this is just, it has been amazing for me. For the audience, we're really curious to hear from you. What have you learned today? What have you heard that you're going to take forward, when it comes to community building and inclusion? You're welcome to put those in the chat. If anyone wants to share, you're welcome to. We have a few minutes. You'll also see a feedback survey link in the chat. We'd really love your feedback. Again, we can't continue to offer high impact and valuable sessions without knowing what it is that you want. So yeah, please take a minute, think about your reflections, put them in the chat. Yangfa, again, I'm just so grateful that you said yes to this and that I got to spend this time with you, as well as the audience today.
Again, I know we spoke about timeline, but we had no idea today was going to be the day. And again, I think earlier you checked on how I was. I'm actually feeling, yeah, really excited to be doing this, knowing that will be the end of my first day of the handover, the leadership transition. So yeah, I mean, I can't think of a better way to spend to the end at the day for me, because it's, yeah, it's coming to the evening here in Singapore, and yeah, I'm really honored to be invited in the first place. So thank you.
It has been our pleasure seeing some really cool things come into the chat. People being really grateful for being here. Love this reflection. Binaries need to be broken. Instead of umbrella solutions, we need to be creative and strive for modular, tailored solution towards inclusivity. Yeah, love that. Really appreciate that. Again, we still have a few minutes, so if you've got other things that you want to put in the chat, please feel free. And yeah, just feeling very grateful to have spent the last hour and 15 minutes in this space with everyone.
Uh, Can I just take this opportunity to kind of mention a comment that I think somebody
Yeah,
put
please
there. I
do.
mean, it's a comment that everyone can see. So I think it's somebody whose name is Louise, if I'm not wrong. A mention of from someone from Skyscanner. Louise says I'm part of the LGBTQ employee network, and yeah, again, thank you, Louise and Skyscanner. Louise says it inspired a donation from our team, presumably the Skyscanner team, and to Oogachaga. So thank you again. And this is, it matters a lot to us because we are a non-profit organization, we are a registered charity, and again, when we hear of individuals and corporates and communities and people who want to support us, it tells us that we are still relevant and that we're still needed. And of course, the minute we are no longer needed, the minute we're no longer supported, it means we shouldn't exist. I mean, that's the very nature of services and needs, right? So thank you. It's Louise, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you to Louise and colleagues from Skyscanner.
That's incredible. Love that. And just so everyone knows, we'll make sure that you get a copy of the recording. We will share out all of Oogachaga's contact information and socials. If you want some real simple ways to make sure that you drive something forward from today, like amplify the work that they're doing, bring more awareness to it. Those are really small, easy things that actually can mean a lot when it comes to organizations who need more global support. So thank you all so much.